Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. 40,000 lives in 40 years. After decades of bloodshed, the PKK terror group says it's laying down its arms, bringing an apparent end to one of the longest-running campaigns of terrorism in the region. Branded a terrorist organization by Turkiye, the U.S., and the European Union, the group's disbandment was welcomed by the UN Secretary General. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called the move historic, framing it as a turning point for national unity and security. Erdogan added that the latest development marks a victory not just for Turkiye, but for regional stability. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan echoed the sentiment, but warned that Ankara will remain vigilant, monitoring remnants of the group and ensuring what he called a terror-free Turkiye. The announcement comes after public appeals in February from the PKK's imprisoned leader, who called on the group to disband. Syria's Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaibani also welcomed the declaration, calling it a step toward restoring security across the region. But is this truly the end of the PKK? And will its affiliates and global sympathizers follow calls to disband? For more, joining me now from Istanbul is Mehmet Celik. He's the editorial coordinator of the daily Sabah. From Islamabad, Hamzah Rifaat, head of the Central Asia Program for Regional Connectivity at the Institute of Regional Studies. And from Ankara, Bilgehan Ozturk, Strategic Communications and Foreign Relations Manager at Anadolu Agency. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. 40 years of terror coming to an end. Is it coming to an end? Mehmet, is this the closing scene of the 40-year horror movie?
Well, Yusuf, we would like to think that it is, and we are hoping that it is. I mean, indeed, this is the beginning of the end. The decision by the PKK to disarm and lay down their arms, I think this is the beginning of a process of a terror-free Turkey and terror-free region, hopefully. I mean, the PKK has not only been a problem for Turkey, but it has been the source of instability in the wider region, including northern Syria, northern Iraq, parts of Iran. Nevertheless, people of the region have suffered from this PKK, which has been ultimately an imperialist project in the region. Let's hope that these upcoming days, where the steps will be taken, will not face any sabotage or any other factors that will put a halt to this process for a better future.
So Hamza, the PKK, generally a organized terror group as far as terror groups go. They operate like a cartel in some places, like a narcotics cartel, some places human trafficking, human smuggling. They have a lot of cash generating activities. Now you have the leadership saying, okay, we're disbanded, but there's still tens of thousands of terrorists in the region who partake in these illegal activities. They have training, they have access to weapons. Is this order to disband and disarm going to trickle down? What's going to happen with this remnants of this group?
Well, if you come up with a comparative analysis of most other terrorist groups all across the world, a lot of them have claimed that they've disbanded, but a lot of them continue to activate and ensure that their sources of revenue from narcotics, from illegal drug trafficking, human smuggling continues. And I don't think it's going to be that different with the PKK. So the authorities in Ankara and Baghdad would need to keep a very close eye as to whether the PKK message of disbandment would actually have a trickle-down effect on the local population or the local, you could say, organizational structure with which it operates. Because you see, when an organization disbands, it takes time for the entire structure to basically get disbanded. And I think that is something which would be more of a wait-or-watch scenario for both Turkey, Iraq, and all the other countries who have a stake in ensuring that there is a peaceful region. I think if you look at the PKK, it would be interesting to see what sort of, you could say, banning of their activities would actually take place abroad, because obviously we've seen PKK sleeper cells in countries such as Sweden, whether the Swedish authorities would actually clamp down on their illegal activities, which are funding their ability to actually attack Turkey and Iraq. That is something that needs to be seen. So I do agree with that point. But I think, this formal, you could say, announcement of disbanding the entire organization brings to an end of years and decades of conflict, which is definitely a positive sign for regional peace.
Bilgehan, the Turkish state, when it's viewing this announcement, obviously it's very happy that this group has disbanded and disarmed. But there's also some expectations from the PKK. Do you think the Turkish state will be open to an amnesty? Do you think they'll be open to some type of de-radicalization of these PKK remnants? Because at the end of the day, again, the question I asked Hamzah, you have a lot of men with a lot of weapons, a lot of experience in illegal activities and terrorist activities, and all of a sudden now, no chain of command. What do? And what does the Turkish state do to ensure that a replicate of the PKK doesn't form? Because, I mean, we've seen how Al-Qaeda formed. We've seen how ISIS formed. How do we know that we don't get a PKK 2.0 out of this?
There are a lot of, let's say, mechanisms and a lot of options on the table to tackle this challenging periods for Turkish states. And there are, let's say, equivalents of this kind of DDR processes, the reintegration or de-radicalization of these kind of terrorist elements. There are a lot of examples from across the world, and there are lessons learned from those instances. And these mechanisms and whether they will be able to be applied in the case of PKK will be also determining how this process will unfold and whether it will be successful. So it is not clear whether now there will be a transitional justice, let's say, period, which is the case mainly in these kind of instances. But whatever it takes, I think Turkish state will make use of any kind of mechanism that would be beneficial and that would safeguard the sanity of this process moving smoothly. The elements that they haven't committed crimes against Turkish state and against Turkish people, they will be granted amnesty. But the ones that have committed crimes, there will be obviously other mechanisms such as exile and relocation to other countries. But at the same time, for the ones let's say in the middle or in the gray zones, other kind of mechanisms such as de-radicalization and the like, I think they will be also tapped.
Mehmet, I want to ask you about the YPG, the PKK's Syrian arm, and this is generally how it's referred to. In Turkey, they have status as a terror group. They're designated, but generally outside of Turkey, the YPG isn't designated. Now, with the PKK disbanding, the YPG kind of has its own entity status. In the past, when the Turks launched counterterrorism operations against the YPG, it was, well, that's the Syrian arm of the PKK, and by designation and by close relationship, they're also terrorists. That was what the Turks would explain. But with the PKK gone, does this strengthen the YPG status, saying, well, we're not really tied to another group, we're our own entity? Or does this weaken the YPG not having that main group to fall back on for support? What's their status? What's their position? And how is it going to be going forward for them?
Well, Yusuf, although these two groups have been in a way portrayed as two separate entities, I think it's very clear from those who are really interested in the topic that organically and organizationally, these two groups are linked to one another. They follow the same chain of command and the same organizational hierarchy. Nevertheless, when it comes to PKK's umbrella organization, the KCK, we see that rather than a very vertical lineup, it's a very horizontal at the same time structure. This is why when we talk about the PKK, we know that there's other offshoots. We know that there's other tiers within the organization that carry out different, let's say, operational, mechanisms, so that it can be active at different parts of the same country, but also across borders in the region. When it comes to YPG itself, Turkey's position is that these two groups are not not different entities. They're part of the same organization. However, the fact that there is this nation building in Syria, and the fact that there's this agreement or this deal at least reached between the YPG and the new Syrian government in Damascus. They want to see that coming to materialize and to turn into something more tangible when it comes to laying down arms in Syria and integrating into the system there. However, Turkey has also holds its position very firmly that if this does not happen, if this transition doesn't happen through peaceful means, Turkey is ready to actually, Turkey's position when it comes to counterterrorism will not change and has not changed. If that armed organizations stay as it is, Turkey says that we're ready to eliminate it through other means, if not peacefully. So I think at this point for Turkey, how it sees this announcement, it is that it is an encompassing decision for all tiers, all branches of the PKK and its offshoots.
Hamzah, in your first answer, you talked about Baghdad and the security situation in Iraq. Now, with the PKK dissolved and disarmed, how is this going to impact Turkey's relationship with Baghdad and also in the north with Erbil? Is this going to be a huge positive with probably one of the major security obstacles taken off the table? Or will the PKK being disbanded, but maybe more guerrilla factions, if this deal kind of holds but doesn't really trickle down, will that cause even more stress between Ankara and Baghdad?
Well, to answer your first question, I think that the relationship between Iraq and Turkiye historically has been of that of suspicion with regard to counterterrorism efforts. And I think the same could also be said with regard to the SDF, which actually does operate in Syria too. So I think that there will be prospects for counterterrorism cooperation between the two countries. There will be a cooling of relations to the point where they can actually sit down, talk, because we do have the succession of dialogues taking place between Iraq and Turkey, as well as Iraq, as well as Turkey and Syria as well. And I think that could materialize in a more concrete form. But again, it depends on the speed and you could say the progress with which the PKK disarms till the very end. I think I'm more concerned about how the Kurdistan factions are actually, operating within Iraq itself, as political parties. How have they actually, received the news of PKK disbanding? And would they, look forward to the prospect of militarizing in the very near future? That could actually jeopardize ties between Turkey and Iraq. But for now, I think we need to tread with cautious optimism that yes, with the PKK disbanded, Iraq, Syria, as well as Turkey, with regard to key centers such as Erbil, can actually work together to try and make sure that such alpha elements and nefarious elements, which are a threat to regional peace, can actually be disbanded. But I think that it is an incremental process, because you do have political parties which have been sympathetic to the PKK, the militarization operating within Iraq right now. And how would Turkey, under Erdogan's leadership, actually deal with that phenomenon? I think that's going to dictate the terms of whether or not peace can actually materialize, and whether relationship between Iraq and Turkey, which has been fractious with regard to counterterrorism, obviously with the PKK operating on its soil, as well as in Syria, whether or not that can actually be replaced with a more warm, cordial, and you could say mutually agreeable relationship with regard to counterterrorism.
Mm-hmm. Bilgehan, I want to shift to Syria a little now. Very recently, U.S. President Donald Trump said that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had asked him about Syria and asked him to lift sanctions. And Trump said that fresh start possibility, he's thinking about it. So it seems that Erdogan's obviously very interested in bringing stability, security, prosperity back to Syria, being its embattled neighbor over the past decade. And it seems that Trump is kind of almost on the same page. The Europeans seem interested as well. What does the PKK disbanding mean for Syria? Is this going to be huge? Does this strengthen al-Shara's hand in his negotiations with groups that are close to the PKK inside Syria? Does this strengthen Turkey's hand, if need be, in the future for any type of security operations?
Well, if the coup has, let's say, prevailed, obviously it is a huge win for Shara and Damascus if the PKK is disbanding, because obviously YPG is PKK. Actually, the previous, let's say, understanding between Mazlum Abdi and Ahmed al-Shara in Damascus also helps, obviously. But the thing is, YPG has always played the card that it is not PKK. People who work on YPG, who work on Syria, closely following the Syrian civil war from the beginning, know for a fact that it is an organic, let's say, offshoot of PKK. There are cadres, let's say, sent or assigned from Kandil Mountains, the upper echelon of PKK in Kandil Mountains, to, let's say, to supervise the activities of YPG on Syrian soil. So YPG, but YPG always wanted to benefit from the doubt that it is not an organic part of PKK, and now I would say YPG has a vested interest in again denying that it is a part of PKK, and this way it can argue that this is PKK that is disbanding, as I'm not PKK, so it doesn't affect me. It doesn't mean that I will lay down the arms. So that is the actual risk, and it has to be managed within the framework of the, let's say, greater framework of understanding and dealing with Kurdish, let's say, separatism or autonomy in northeast Syria within the framework of, let's say, their understanding with Ahmed al-Shara and Damascus government. And Turkey will be really closely monitoring this, let's say, process. And apparently, and luckily, I would say, Turkey and the United States are on the same page on this. And it is even, let's say, a very, let's say, positively surprising that Trump is even, let's say, attaching greater importance to his bilateral relations with President Erdogan, to the extent that he is drawing lines for even Netanyahu. So this is a very, let's say, lucky and I would say until now in the negotiations with PKK's, let's say, disbanding itself, Turkey played his hand very well until now. But it is a, let's say, a risky situation when it comes to YPG's aspirations from now on. But Turkey will close the monitor.
Mm-hmm. We have seen a lot more dialogue between the Americans and the Turks since Donald Trump's been in office, and a lot of kind words back and forth between Washington, Ankara, and Trump and Erdogan. Now, Mehmet, do you think that the U.S. will continue their drawdown in Syria and that the disbanding of the PKK is going to have a positive impact on U.S.-Turkey relations?
Well, I think so. I mean, of course, since Trump was elected in the second term, he has been, really praising Mr. Erdogan's initiatives regarding Syria and how Turkey has positively impacted what's happening in Syria. Now, when it comes to the PKK, whether the U.S. will actually stop supporting the YPG, this is something that I think we should wait and see. Because YPG is still a very useful tool for when the time comes, it can be used for different purposes, for the United States or for Israel or for even other neighboring countries in the region for Turkey. I think here we should acknowledge one thing. Trump is a very transactional leader. He's a very he has this business-like approach to bilateral relations with many countries. But this leader-to-leader diplomacy or leader-to-leader relationship has also been very pragmatic when it comes to Turkey and U.S. relations. And it has actually contributed positively to the relations between the two countries. Although Turkey and the United States disagree on many things, even when it comes to how much room can Israel have for maneuvering in the region, Trump acknowledges that there is a new Turkey reality in the region, and that should be respected. And this is what was, I think, what I got from the Netanyahu and Trump meeting at the White House.
Hamzah, Mehmet touched on the Netanyahu-Trump press, and I thought it was really interesting because obviously no love lost between Erdogan and Netanyahu, but Trump praising Erdogan on multiple occasions during that presser. We've seen Trump take a little more of a harder position against the Netanyahu administration. Let's not say Israel, but towards the administration. Much warmer position towards the Erdogan administration. We're seeing some cooperation now in Syria. The Ukraine-Russia meeting being held in Istanbul. Trump saying that he might even stop over. So a warming here. Are we seeing signs that the U.S. wants to hand over more of the security responsibilities to Turkey in the region, not just regarding the PKK or terrorism security, but just more handling the region, wanting to see Erdogan take a bigger role, Turkey take a bigger role?
Agreed. I would actually agree with that predilection. The reason is that if you take a look at Trump's historical statements on Turkiye, he's actually glorified Turkiye for its robust counterterrorism operations. And I think this warming up, obviously Donald Trump is on a 3-day visit to the Arab world. He's going to be stopping by. He has stopped by, I should say, in Saudi Arabia. He's going to be stopping by in the United Arab Emirates, as well as in Qatar. Now, these countries, obviously, Turkey has had an up and down relationship with some of them. But you do believe that Trump's overall equation is to make sure that all Middle Eastern countries actually live in peace. And I think Turkey, as a regional power, obviously with the PKK now disbanded, Trump would want to make sure that Turkey takes the lead as far as commercial ties between the Middle East and the United States is concerned. Because obviously, Donald Trump has come under immense amount of scrutiny over his tariff policy, which has obviously disproportionately affected countries in Asia, which includes Turkey as well. So you will see this warming of ties. You will see Turkey take a more pronounced role. As far as Israel is concerned, I think the Israeli media is extremely upset about the fact that Trump has actually snubbed them at this time around, because this is his first visit in his second tenure when he's actually going to the Middle East, and he decided not to stop by in Israel. So you will see a lot of, you could say, an excellent equation between Donald Trump and the Erdogan administrations. You won't see that much of cooperation between the Netanyahu administration and Donald Trump, but you will see on the question of counterterrorism, regional prosperity, B2B contacts, business-to-business contacts, as well as P2P contacts with people-to-people contacts. You'll see Donald Trump presidency as well as an Erdogan presidency sharing much in common. Turkey would actually be considered to be a regional leader. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about, negotiating with Iran with regard to its nuclear weapons program, the Russia-Ukraine, moot, which is scheduled to take place in Istanbul. So you do have lots of areas of cooperation and not many divergences between Turkey and the U.S., which was historically the case when Erdogan was in power in Ankara and the Biden administration was in power in Washington, D.C. So now with the PKK out of the way, Donald Trump would actually consider this irritant to be out of the way. And now he will actually focus on, like the previous speaker rightly pointed out, that he's more of a transactional leader. He believes in business-to-business contacts. So that bodes well for Turkey, it bodes well for Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, and it bodes well for the region, minus PKK.
Thank you. Now, Bilgehan, we've talked about the region, but one thing we haven't talked about, the domestic situation in Turkey. How is this going to impact Turkey? Because from a national security perspective, the number one threat is now gone. How is this going to impact politics inside Turkey and society?
Well, there are, let's say, optimism, obviously, and understandably. This is the dream for generations in Turkey, I would say. It has been 40 years and we lost, tens of thousands of people. So no matter what, this is good news. It's actually great news. And that is being embraced by all walks of people and walks of, let's say, the Turkish domestic politics. Of course, now this decision means that PKK will continue. PKK, make no mistake, does not, let's say, does not give up on its ideology. And, this process means that PKK will continue its ideology, further its agenda through let's say, non-violent means. And that means another, let's say, dimension for the let's say Turkish politics, because Kurdish politics will take another shape. We can't really put our finger on it at the moment. How exactly it will transform and what exactly it will transform, but it will have an inevitable impact.
Mehmet, Hamzah, Bilgehan, thanks for joining me. We're out of time. Hopefully this is the closing curtain on 40 years of terror. Thanks for joining me. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.